Hello, and welcome to another one of our Wednesday Bible studies as we study from the book of Proverbs. We've been using Mike Willis's workbook as we've been going through this study, looking at collections of verses of the Proverbs that he's put together to help us explore various themes that are discussed by Solomon in his wisdom. We're today looking at lesson number 11, which is entitled, Honesty is the Best Policy. Honesty is becoming somewhat of a rare commodity in the day and time in which we live. Back during the days that I was in collegiate debate, and has been characteristic all down through the years in entering into all kinds of Bible discussions, it's important that we deal with information honestly. We've seen examples in the mass media here through the years of where maybe they'll take a clip of something that has happened and they will edit the clip and only give you a small segment of what was actually transpiring, or maybe it will be an edited audio clip and it leaves a totally different impression than what really was the case. In essence, they're being dishonest with the event that transpired and their recording of it and reporting of it because they want to make it look a certain way that is appropriate to them rather than giving the full picture so that everyone could make decisions for themselves. That's not exactly being honest. That's taking things out of context. That is eliminating context. It's slanting the narrative. And it happens at all different levels. The same thing can happen in business and industry, where you talk about your product and highlight its good points, but then you know that there are noted weaknesses that need to yet be addressed, but you don't want to discuss those. You don't want to mention those modifications and don't want to warn the consumer that this may not be exactly what you're needing. They want to make a sale. And so they will slant the information to make it look like the product is the best it's ever been. It's the perfect fit for what you need. And after you make the purchase, then you find you've been somewhat deceived. It's not performing as you were led to believe or how you expected things to perform. So honesty is indeed a major consideration in the day and time in which we live. Here in lesson 11, the author gives us a definition of honesty at the very outset. Originally, it means honorable, held in respect, respectable, credible, something that is commendable, seemly, a generalized epithet of commendation. If somebody is looked at as being honest, that is high praise. They will not lie, cheat, or steal. They will be truthful and trustworthy. And also, as a third aspect of the definition, it's as showing fairness and sincerity, being straightforward, free from deceit. Someone who has the reputation for being honest gained that by fair methods, not by cheating, lying, or stealing. And that should be a profile of the behavior of Christians, that we should be known for being honest in all things. As we look to the questions, and here in lesson 11, it says, in what way will honesty and integrity guide or direct a man? So that's the advice that we find Solomon giving to us in Proverbs chapter 11 and going down to verse 3. He says, the integrity of the upright shall guide them, but the perverseness of transgressors shall destroy them. Dropping down to verse 5, he said, the righteousness of the perfect shall direct his way, but the wicked shall fall by his own wickedness. What he's saying is that once we have decided to be honest and to preserve one's integrity and reputation, then day-to-day decisions come easily because we're going to simply speak the truth. We're going to be honest with folks. We're not going to develop the habit of lying and then telling lie number 2 to cover lie number 1, but rather we want to be straightforward with individuals. We want to be kind, but we also want to be honest in all of our dealings, in our conversation pieces, in our business dealings, in all that we do. Because once the decision has been made that I want that good reputation of being honest. I want to be a person that is looked at as an individual of integrity. That will guide our decision making and take us to do good things, the things that people can respect. They will perform those actions that people can appreciate because they can trust us, because of the honesty that they know to be characteristic of us. In question 2, from what does honesty deliver us? Well, here in verse 6 of Proverbs chapter 11, he said, the righteousness of the upright shall deliver them, but transgressors shall be taken in their own naughtiness. The individual who is trying to do what's right, he doesn't have to look over his shoulder worrying about who's going to find him out and discover his lies and dishonesty. And so the individual who sets his course in following honesty and goodness is going to be delivered from the hardships and the consequences of doing evil. As he says here in verse 6, the transgressors will be taken in their own naughtiness. Their sin will catch up to them, but the righteous will also be appreciated for their goodness. As we practice honesty, we need not to apologize. We don't have to go back and retrace our steps and say, well, I'm sorry, I misled you on this. We can be trusted to be honest and someone that can be turned to with confidence. In question 3, he says, what kind of inheritance does an honest man leave to his children? This one I found very interesting. In Proverbs chapter 13, going down to verse 22, he says, a good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. In other words, whenever it's all said and done, honesty is the best policy. It's the one that's going to provide the greatest long-term benefits. There's going to be both financial reward as people trust you and are willing to deal with you, but you're also going to be sort of setting milestones that your future generations will look back to remember the honesty of their father or to their grandfather, how he was well regarded throughout the community for being an honest and a just man. You leave a legacy by making such a choice. A man's honest reputation lives on, and sowing in righteousness can also allow him to reap rewards, both in the esteem that is shown to him by others and even in the riches that he accumulates. For as he says here in verse 22, the good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children. It is something that abides. And going over to Proverbs chapter 20, going down to verse 7, the just man walketh in his integrity. His children are blessed after him. What a wonderful role model an honest man has been to his children. His neighbors and friends have seen his honesty, and they have applauded that. They have respected that. They have appreciated that. And that becomes a role model for others to follow because they want to be like that themselves. In question 4, what do these Proverbs teach us about business ethics? Now, we'll also get into some very important material here, because in the business world, often underhanded practices will be used. They'll try to steal trade secrets. They will try to find a way to get ahead of the competition, even if it means lying and being dishonest or trying to take advantage of others whose knowledge base is not as strong as it needs to be. In Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 1, he cites here what was commonly practiced even back in biblical times, and that was to deceive others by using a false system of weights. In other words, I'm pretending to sell you 3 pounds of something when really maybe I only sell you 2.5 pounds. They'll find ways to shortchange others by using false measures. Here in Proverbs 11 and verse 1, a false balance is abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. God wants us to be honest in our dealings and not deceptive. Over in Proverbs 16 and verse 11, a just weight and balance are the Lord's. All the weights of the bag are his work. In other words, we are simply understanding what is the important thing to do that is right and just and proper, and God blesses us in that decision. Over in Proverbs 20, and going to verse 10, divers weights and divers measures, both of them are alike abomination to the Lord. In other words, if we take a basket that's slightly smaller than a bushel, let's say, but yet we pretend I'm selling you a full bushel of goods, you've shortchanged somebody. You've taken money from them that you did not deserve to have. The story is told of a son that took over the hardware store of his father. And his father had a yardstick on the counter that he used for measuring out yard goods and rope and other kinds of things. And that yardstick had been there for years. And that's what he had used in good faith as a measuring stick. Well, fortunately today we have organizations within the government that come around and double check the use of weights and measures to make sure people remain honest. And one day that inspector came in, and when he measured that yardstick, wouldn't you know, it had been mismarked. It was only 35 inches long instead of 36 inches long. Now, the new owner of the store, the son that had inherited this business, now had to decide what was he going to do. Now in some cases, individuals could say, well, that's the yardstick my daddy's always used. That's the way we've always believed it to be true and honest. And so since he's always done it, I'm going to do it too. But that wouldn't have been appropriate. Fortunately, this young man understood it was an honest error, it was a mistake, and he was going to fix it by replacing it with the right length of yardstick. When he learned better, he did better. And that's what honesty will do to us. It makes us constantly strive to be the best that we can be. So what Solomon is teaching us here in these verses in Proverbs 11, 16, and 20 is that an honest measure is something that we need to use, and the Lord knows whether or not we are. And dishonesty in any of its forms is looked at as an abomination unto the Lord. In question 5, what is the sin of usury? That's not a term that we use a whole lot today, but over in Proverbs chapter 28 and going down to verse 8, here Solomon says, as a bird that wandereth from her nest, so is a man that wandereth from his place. Let's go to the 28th chapter instead of the 27th one. Proverbs 28 and verse 8. He that by usury and unjust gain increases his substance, he shall gather it for him that will pity the poor. In other words, it's going to catch up with you. If you try to charge excessive interest, if you try to exploit the poor, if you find ways to try and cheat others and take advantage of their misfortune, it's going to catch up with you. And one day, any wealth that you are able to attain, it's going to be drained off to somebody else. There are many such operations today that in some respects appear to be supplying an important need, but they are very easily abused and a setup for inappropriate things. You take the individual who sees someone who's down on his luck, and he's actually a loan shark, and he realizes this person needs some money. I'll loan him some money, but it is at an outrageous interest rate that poor man's never going to be able to repay. He has enticed that person into his own financial calamity. Sometimes individuals lose control when they use payday loans because they have a high rate of interest, and whenever the loan comes due, they may not be able to repay all of that loan. So I'll just have to refinance that thing. And pretty soon it's just like being in a wheel. Every week the rate goes up, the amount of money being paid out gets greater and greater, and getting ahead on that can be very difficult to do. Now, they may be giving you facts, and you walk into it with information, but people that are poor and people oftentimes of poor judgment will fall prey to that. Solomon is saying that's not the appropriate way to do business. Do not take advantage of the less fortunate and those that are struggling. In question 6, into what temptation and sins does a man wanting to get rich quickly fall? There are some individuals who think this is my ticket to riches. If I buy this lottery ticket, or if I follow this new scheme, I'm going to be able to bilk people out of money, and soon I will have a pocket full. In Proverbs 28 and verse 20, a faithful man shall abound with blessings, but he that maketh haste to be rich shall not be innocent. What happens is that the individual who is chasing after the dollar so fervently is going to lie and cheat and swindle and steal and do whatever he can because he wants his money quickly. He doesn't want to do the honest labor. He doesn't want to put in all the required time and effort. He wants a quick, easy ticket to be able to sit back and say, I am rich. Down in verse 22, he said, he that hasteth to be rich hath an evil eye, and considereth not that poverty shall come upon him. If he is concerned about gypping other people and taking advantage of other people, he should not be surprised when someone preys upon his being gullible and is able to bilk him out of everything that he's tried to accumulate. Bad judgments, and more bad judgments can lead a person to greater and greater calamity, because dishonesty tends to lead you to short-sightedness. I'm looking at the here and now, or what's going to happen in the next day or two, and you fail to see what the big picture may hold. In question 7, it says, what business attitude should a man take towards someone in desperate circumstances? That goes back to what we were talking about a little while ago. There are things that can happen that can put a man in a desperate financial bind. Well, what should be our attitude toward that? In Proverbs chapter 22 and going to verse 16, Solomon says, he that oppresseth the poor to increase his riches, and he that giveth to the rich shall surely come to want. And going down to verse 22 of this same 22nd chapter, he says, rob not the poor because he is poor, neither oppress the afflicted in the gate. My son works in the banking industry and tells the story of what brought him on board with this particular bank. The president was telling him a story of a man that owned some land right next door to one of their branches, and the bank wanted to expand its holdings. They needed more space, and so they needed to buy that property next door. Well, they held the mortgage on that man's property, and they knew how much he owed, and they also saw that he had fallen on hard times financially. And so some of the counselors in the bank said, well, just wait a little while, and we'll be able to foreclose, and we'll be able to take that property because he's falling farther and farther and farther behind in his bills. But the president of the company was a man of integrity. And he said, I'm not going to take advantage of someone who's going through a hard time. We're going to make him an offer on that piece of property that is fair market price. Yes, we could get it more cheaply if we just wait and repossess it, but that's not being fair to a man who's trying to do what's right. And that integrity and that honesty was what helped persuade my son to go to work for this banking institution. It's important that we carry ourselves with a sense of empathy for others. How can I help? And to deal with all in honesty. Because Solomon's saying here, do not oppress or exploit the poor. They have all kinds of struggles, and so don't kick them while they're down. In question 8, how does dishonesty in business eventually ruin a man? Over in Proverbs 20 and going down to verse 17, the bread of deceit is sweet to a man, but afterwards his mouth shall be filled with gravel. Eventually, his dishonesty will catch up with him. And all of a sudden, now that he has been exposed for his dishonesty, his reputation is damaged. And often individuals will choose to do business with somebody else that they can trust. There is a sense of mistrust about this individual and whether or not they should really deal with him because you can't be sure of what you're getting. And he will find individuals suddenly avoiding him and not wanting to have anything to do with him. All of these can bring your business to ruin, all because you took advantage of others, you were dishonest, and your dishonesty, shall we say, came back to bite you because it became common knowledge and individuals did not want to put up with that. So that your own business can be destroyed by the way in which you manage it poorly using dishonest practices. In question 9, what one truth do these proverbs teach? And he's going to several different proverbs here that we can review. He gives us Proverbs chapter 16 and going down to verse 19. Better it is to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. Over in Proverbs 19 and going down to verse 22. The desire of a man is his kindness, and a poor man is better than a liar. Over in Proverbs chapter 22 and going down to verse 1. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold. And then finally, over in Proverbs 28 and going down to verse 6, he says, better is the poor that walketh in his uprightness than he that is perverse in his ways, though he be rich. The point that Solomon is making here is it is better to have less and be honorable than to be shady and dishonest and accumulate riches. You'll be able to sleep at night walking in a righteous path, not being worried that your dishonesty is going to catch up with you and you will be exposed. A good name is definitely worth all of the effort it takes to preserve that. Somebody who is looking out to do the right thing will be respected for those efforts. And so the sin that is going to follow us is that when we start down that path of dishonesty, it leads us to all other kinds of sinful behaviors. And if we will choose instead to do that which is right, we will be built up in the estimation of others. In question 10, what form of dishonesty does Romans 13:8 condemn? Now in Romans 13:8, there's a passage here that oftentimes individuals may misconstrue, I believe, just a little bit. Here he's talking about the choices that we should make. And he says here in verse 8, owe no man anything, but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. All right, it is sometimes going to be necessary to borrow some money to maybe to purchase a piece of property or to make some other major purchase. But going into that contract agreement means that we should go into it with our best intentions of fulfilling exactly what we promised to pay. And we should not go into it with the idea of how can I swindle this person and cheat in finances and somehow maybe get out of this contract or purposely leave this debt unpaid. If you don't owe a man anything, that temptation is not going to be there. You're going to be on a level playing field. You're going to have your finances in order. You will be able to get by much better. But if you do have to temporarily incur some indebtedness, it is critical that the honest man put forth every effort to pay that debt. And if he hits a hard time, he talks to the creditor, explains that, and works out arrangements, and doesn't run off and hide. He doesn't move every 30 days to avoid paying rent to his landlord, but rather instead, he works out arrangements that can be a benefit to all. Because whenever we develop that habit of swindling and cheating and leaving debts unpaid, that record follows us and is a blemish against our integrity and our reputation to all those who examine such record. And so there are several forms of dishonesty involving the tongue that the author talks about in question 11. He said, what are some of these ones that are condemned here in the book of Proverbs? Well, over the first passage that he gives us is over in Proverbs chapter 12 and going down to verse 22. Proverbs 12 and going down to verse 22. He says, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are his delight. So one form of dishonesty is lying, misrepresenting, not telling the truth. Another form of sin that comes from dishonesty is found first over in Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 18. He that hideth hatred with lying lips, and he that uttereth a slander is a fool. And it follows that up with Proverbs 23 in verses 6 through 8. He says, Eat thou not the bread of him that hath an evil eye, neither desire thou his dainty meats. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Eat and drink, saith he to thee, but his heart is not with thee. The morsel which thou hast eaten shalt thou vomit up, and lose thy sweet words. He said there are some individuals who are very deceptive, and don't you be one of them. Don't you be the individual who smiles to your face, but then is a lying backstabber behind your back. Do not be the type of individual who is going to try to flatter and to get all kinds of benefit from another individual, but that individual has an evil eye. He's out to manipulate you and trick you and see what he can do to do you in. Deception is written all over this. And that's what Solomon is warning us against. Dishonesty manifests itself oftentimes in deceptive practices, and we need to be aware of that. And then in Proverbs 14, Solomon talks about another manifestation of dishonesty. In Proverbs 14 and verse 5, a faithful witness will not lie, but a false witness will utter lies. A false witness will say whatever he is being paid to say, or whatever he thinks is going to give him a benefit, and the truth is not to be found in him. In verse 25 of this same 14th chapter of Proverbs, a true witness delivereth souls, but a deceitful witness speaketh lies. We should not have to swear on a Bible that we're telling the truth. People should know that that is what is characteristic of us, and that we are going to speak the truth. We are not going to lie to cover for somebody else. We are not going to bear false witness. In question 12, the author simply asks us to list several kinds of stealing that is prevalent in our society. Well, that can be quite a list. There are some individuals who will knowingly make false promises. Oh, I'll bring this back to you tomorrow. But then they run off with it, knowing full well they had no intention of ever returning the borrowed possession. So many make false promises that they know that they cannot or will not keep. Sometimes we see stealing represented by doing a false misrepresentation of a product, trying to steal one's money to make a purchase, but it's based upon lies and deceit. Manipulation of the fine print of a contract to fix it so that you don't have to live up to the terms of that contract. To say, well, there's some little phrase here, and as a result of this little phrase, that means I don't owe you anything. Those fine-tuned phrases, that fine print, can be manipulated so that the right thing and the intent of the contract is completely negated. And such deception and such stealing and dishonesty is not right. Stealing from an employer, thinking if they don't need this, they'll never miss this. It's not ours to carry home. It is not ours to steal. Maybe padding the accounts some way so that we leave false records and have some money that we slip into our own pockets instead of being honest and straightforward in business dealings, like the idea of embezzling money from an employer. All of those things are manifestations of dishonesty. They show the deceptive practices, the false witnessing, the lying and covering up of those lies that's being done. And we find it all around us. And trying to discover the truth whenever somebody is lying can be a challenge. And sometimes individuals are falsely accused of lying when they're not. And you can lay out the evidence and say, hey, I didn't lie. This is the truth of what I said. This is the truth of what I did. But if someone has their mind already made up, they're not going to accept even the evidence that is presented, if there is any way to get around it. And so we have to brace for that as well. We are going to be victims sometimes of the malicious, of individuals who are unreasonable and those who will not listen to truth. But truth is still important. And then finally, what consequences come from dishonesty? Well, individuals have learned the hard way that dishonesty does not pay wonderful dividends. There's going to be a day of reckoning. There will be a retribution when individuals discover what you have done, either in their hard feelings towards you, or maybe even in the legal matters that they will pursue in terms of lawsuits and other legal actions to take the individual who is lying and dishonest and hold him accountable for his actions. And that could result in fines or imprisonment for an individual who has been dishonest with others. But of course, the most important consequence is eternal damnation. Whenever we start thinking about the things in Scripture that condemn us, we find that there are many individuals who relish in doing the wrong thing. And as we've mentioned, that lying is one form of dishonesty. In Revelation 21:8, we see the end result of that. It said, "But the fearful and unbelieving, the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." There are many condemnations in Scripture of the practice of sorcery. Well, often that was done because drugs were used to deceive somebody, to put them out of consciousness, to distort their judgment, or there was some trickery used to deceive and to make the sorcerer appear to be all-powerful when it was just a very powerful illusion. So those types of things, the sorcery, the lying, all these forms of dishonesty that we've talked about, all of these will be held to our account when we face the Lord in judgment. And I pray that we have a record of honesty and of faithfulness and uprightness as we live our lives here below. Well, this concludes Lesson 11 of this series. We appreciate you joining us today, and we'll look forward to our next class next week as we move further in our study of Proverbs.